Hi, my name is Meredith Rogers, and my capstone is called A Forgotten Perspective, which is a modern women's revival on male-dominated art movements. Okay, so for my project, what I did is I took three different well-known art movements that all happened to take place in three different centuries, 1700s, the 1800s, and the 1900s. And I wanted to basically take and show my influence on these pieces. So take inspiration as well as my own personal style and create artworks that show a woman's perspective of these past styles. So to do this, as well as taking inspiration from the movements as a whole, I wanted to kind of narrow it down a little bit more to make it easier on myself. And so what I did is I established a primary influence for each movement to really focus on specific niches and motifs and characteristics. And these artists all actually happen to be some of the founding members of these their respective movements. So for Coco, we had Jean-Antoine Watteau, Impressionism, Claude Monet, and then for Art Nouveau, we had Alphonse Mucha. Okay, so for my first piece, this represents Rococo. This is actually number three in the order of me completing them, and so it's kind of funny that it's the first piece that I have in the series. Quiet Afternoon Alone is an acrylic on canvas, 28 by 22 inches, and I completed this in December. And so when doing my own personal take on these styles, I wanted to make sure that I was using mediums that I'm comfortable with. And so that's acrylic. I am not an oil painter like Watteau or Monet for Impressionism. I am acrylic. And so I did what I was comfortable with to have kind of my own take on these styles. And so for key references, what I mean here is what these are these specifics that I wanted to really put an emphasis on based off of Watteau's paintings. So the Fils Galant was kind of what established Rococo, and it means it's French for aristocratic leisure. And this is just a compositional theme that Watteau started, and this kind of led to the common themes of Rococo. And so, what we're seeing in this painting is kind of uncanny whenever you look at typical Rococo paintings, which are full of life, full of people. It typically has t about 10 um, characters, 10 figures minimum in these pieces because it shows and depicts a social gathering, which is pretty much all women had. Women did not have time for or the ability to have the luxury to have hobbies or things outside of their family and chores and taking care of the house. What they had was social gatherings. They were social creatures. And so these Rococo paintings would show women at these parties, and because they didn't really have a life outside of this. And so this is kind of uncanny because you see this empty area that is supposed to be full of life, but it's empty. And so I just wanted to show this woman, this is kind of her story. This series is this artist's story that was never told. So we see her sitting completely by herself, which is kind of unheard of in the 1700s, sitting by herself, just appreciating nature and just appreciating time alone. And this is just like this is her story, and I just love that. Some of the other things, tree technique is referring to his his paint strokes. Basically, what he would do is he would take a round or a fan brush and just kind of tap in a semicircular motion and create these really round three-dimensional trees. And then the Greek statue may seem a little bit out of place, but this is actually such a strong and key characteristic for Watteau. Even if it has absolutely nothing to do with the story being told or the composition or it seems out of place, there was a Greek sculpture somewhere, or a Roman sculpture somewhere in his paintings. And so I knew immediately when doing Rococo, I had to add a Greek sculpture. Um, but yes, so this is come along for this artist's story. Okay, so for Naterna, this is Art Nouveau, which is actually out of order in terms of timeline progression. And that does irritate me, but the reason why I did this is aesthetically. Rococo was a horizontal painting. Art Nouveau is vertical, and then Impressionism is horizontal, and it just simply looked wrong in a gallery setting, being horizontal, horizontal, vertical, and so I made it sort of sandwiched with horizontal, vertical, horizontal. So this is, like I was saying, Art Nouveau, and this is watercolor and cold press paper, and I'm actually representing, or I'm depicting a lithograph. I'm trying to mimic a lithograph technique, which is a printmaking technique. And I'm not a printmaker, but I'm a watercolorist, and so I was using that sort of soft, airy, super blended, faint look of a lithograph, and I replicated that with watercolor. This is a 15 by 30 inch piece. And so like I was saying, I referenced Alphonse Mucha, and even if you do not know or recognize that name, if you are familiar with Art Nouveau, chances are you are thinking of one of his artworks. And so for the key references for this was his use of ornamentation. Art Nouveau was very decorative. It was very pattern based. It was very ornamental, and I really wanted to make sure I did that, which is completely out of my comfort zone. And so those little half moons, those in the corners, the bottom two corners, are actually direct references to some of Muka's works. Um, female personification is what Muka was known for. I don't think I have ever seen him draw or illustrate a man. It is always women, and it is always women as the embodiment of something, typically nature. So in this scene, this is the embodiment of the moon, which Naterna is nighttime or night sky in Italian. And so I knew immediately I wanted to do a woman representing nature. And what actually is different about this from typical Art Nouveau paintings is that she is not sexualized. Even though she is in what could be seen or read as a scandalous or suggestive pose, I am not advertising her body, which is what Art Nouveau typically was. It was used for graphic design, which was advertisements and marketing. So there's no advertising here. This is just a portrait of the woman. It's just a portrait of the moon. And so I just really wanted to focus on the fact that this is not suggestive, because with Art Nouveau, if you were advertising a bike, you were actually advertising the woman on top of said bike. And it just gets really tiring, the fact that sex sells. That was kind of the motto of Art Nouveau, is sex sells. And I just really wanted to make sure that even though that a woman can have a low cut dress or be looking over her shoulder or have a softer expression, and it doesn't have to mean sex. It does not have to mean she is available or she is being sold. It can just simply be a representative piece. So my final piece was actually the first one I had created back in September. This represents Impressionism. So this is Bridge over Emerson Grand Basin, which is actually the lake at the bottom of Art Hill at Forest Park. I went out and painted in plein air, as many Impressionists did, which means I went in person to this location and painted what I saw in front of me. I did this in two sessions, two 4-hour sessions. And this is acrylic on canvas, like I was saying earlier. This is meant to mimic oil. And this is also a 28 by 22 inch canvas. And so for Monet, Monet is actually known as the father of Impressionism and is actually directly linked to the term Impressionism being used as the title for this group of artists. But for his references, I really wanted to nail the water ripple technique that he does. With Impressionism, there was actually the recent invention of the metal piece on a paintbrush, which directly is linked to the brushstroke style that is used in Impressionism. And so you can really tell that with this water ripples, he was holding his hand really far back and just kind of letting the paintbrush do whatever he wanted. And it was really difficult. And I even had to stop my first session of painting because I was getting so frustrated with this water. But I just came back to it and I just really wanted to focus on that. And so my objective for this was both meant to be educational as well as political and to invoke thought. It is taking these male-dominated art movements and putting a modern woman's perspective and twist on them, where I am taking influences from both these specific artists, but also the time period as a whole, and then using my modern approach to it because I cannot possibly be unbiased and truly set myself in the 1700s or in the 1800s. And so I am not only taking the 1700s influences, I'm taking all of the thousands of things I've been exposed to as a modern woman. And so to ensure that my project could be enjoyed by both art historians, art lovers, and someone who knows absolutely nothing about this, I created little plaques that describe the art movement, what it means, what it does, where it originated, and I kind of talked about those like key motifs and the artists that I took influence from. And these are all by my paintings in the gallery, so you can get all the information you could possibly need. So for my original concept, I had actually been thinking about what I wanted to do for my capstone for 4 years now. This is my freshman year of college. And so I knew I came in head first knowing what I wanted to do. But it was very optimistic and it was very naive. So, for example, I wanted to originally do five art movements, completely chronological, Baroque to Rococo, Rococo to Neoclassicism, Neoclassicism to Romanticism, Romanticism to Impressionism. These are all a domino effect, one after another, art movements, and I really wanted to show how and why these specific movements led to each other, a big domino effect. It was supposed to be educational only. I did not want to really invoke any thought besides just learning about these art movements. And what I actually wanted to do is I wanted to do exact mimics of these art styles so that you couldn't even tell. My goal was so that you couldn't tell that a modern 21st century painting was hiding and blending in with the 1700s painting. So as you can see from the final, that is not what happened. I narrowed it down to three movements and even added Art Nouveau because I wanted to keep it a kind of chronological 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. I made it into be educational and political because I realized that there was no possible way for me as a modern woman to mimic these styles with everything that I have been exposed to. And so even if it was unintentional, I had put the female gaze in comparison to the male gaze into my work, and I wanted just to make that aware instead of it seeming unintentional. And so then, like I was saying, it is not possible for me to mimic these styles because of everything I've been influenced to in my own personal works. So I changed the idea to be artistic influence while also incorporating my personal style to not forget who I am as an artist. And so, yeah, thank you so much for listening. And you can see right here, these are actually the plaques that I was referring to. And then I have title cards underneath each piece to kind of keep with that in gallery exhibition setting.